So if you were raised in Georgia, for sure, probably even Alabama and maybe Mississippi and Tennessee and Kentucky and the Carolinas, if you're raised in those parts of the country, for sure, there's a moment in every single person's life, sometimes multiple times a day for some folks, and depending on the particular season of the year. In fact, there's this moment where your body squeezes in a bunch of air and decides to let it out about a split second later. We call it a sneeze, right? And it just comes out of our lips. And if you've never seen a slow motion sneeze, you need to do that. You can Google it. Don't Google it right now because we're talking, we're having an interaction, right? But you need to go Google it. You need to pull it up on the YouTubes and you need to watch it because it's disgusting. You know what I'm saying? It's absolutely nasty. However, what makes it better, what makes everything about a sneeze better is if you're born in the South, after you sneeze and do that disgusting thing, what do we say? Well, bless you. But if you're a true Southerner, you say, God bless you. You know what I'm saying? God bless you. Come on. How about that? Now, whether it's bless you or God bless you, maybe the God's implied, right? Maybe the God's implied. The question I had was, where'd that come from? I mean, come on. Who woke up one morning and said, you know what? I think when you spit snot everywhere, all over everybody else, the response we ought to have is to say, bless you or God bless you. I think that's good. So I Googled it because Google knows everything is what I hear. And so I Googled it and Google sent me back, man, on a rabbit trail. I'm telling you, you can get some good rabbit trails. This is a good one. So I'm going to save you the time. I'm going to tell you my top 4 that I found because nobody seems to know why we do this or how it started. But here we go. The first one and the most credible, at least it seems they used the largest words when they were giving this explanation, so I think that's why it's most credible, was during the bubonic plague in Rome. The sneezing is one of the main symptoms, evidently. I've never had it, but that's what I hear. Pope Gregory I suggested a tiny prayer in the form of saying, God bless you after a sneeze would protect the person from death. That's the word on the street, on the Google street. I don't know how literal, I'm not sure. Number 2, there's this ancient belief that a sneeze might actually expel the spirit from the body. And unless God blessed you, it wouldn't go back in. That's it. I don't know. I'm not sure how that works. I don't know. But it just in other cultures, this is number 3, the thought is that sneezing forced evil spirits out of you, leaving other people exposed to those wandering spirits. And so when we say God bless you, it protects you and all the people you have sneezed on, not from your snot, but from the wandering spirits that evidently came out with your snot. You know what I'm saying? And then there's this rumor that when you sneeze, your heart stops. And unless you say, bless you, there's a chance it won't start again, right? That's the word on the street. Honestly, it just tells me if you were raised right, whether you say it or not. You know what I'm saying? That's it. That's all it is. There's this moment in the life of Jesus where he wants to talk specifically about what it means for God to bless you. And it catches a lot of people off guard. They think he's going in one direction, and then he just throws this blessing talk on them. And Jesus, in this particular part, we're starting today in this intro to Jesus series of talks, which will last throughout our summer. It's this idea of Jesus shows up on the scene, and he says to everyone, he says, hey, I've got something different I want to tell you about. I've got a different type of kingdom. Now, the people of God, the Jewish people at this time, they were waiting for this. For hundreds of years, they had read in the Old Testament, in their scriptures, that a Savior or a Messiah would come. And so they'd been waiting, just like on the edge of their seat, when will someone show up and say, hey, we are here to save you? And at this particular point in time, they needed saving. They were an occupied state. Rome owned this entire world that they were living in. And so they had their little tiny space around the temple and some of their land, but Rome took their money. Rome walked up and down their streets, dictated how they could live their lives, decided what religious freedoms they could have and what not. They were looking for a Savior. And this Jesus shows up and he starts talking about this new kingdom, and crowds begin to gather because they want to get in on this new kingdom. And finally, it tells us that Jesus decides to gather these people together, and he goes up onto the side of a mountain and he sits down to begin to teach this entire crowd that is gathered, that's waiting to hear, tell us about this new kingdom. Tell us about this army that you are putting together that's going to give us freedom. Tell us, Savior. Tell us, Messiah. Come on, tell us. How can we be a part of it? How can we jump in? How can we get a piece of this action? And Jesus sits down and says, let's talk about blessings. I think it's interesting that when we look at Jesus, this is his first public message that he's going to give. It's when we talk about intro to Jesus, it's not really intro to Jesus like, hey, for the next 6, 7, 8 weeks, we're going to be going through the 101s of Jesus. No, it's really that Jesus decided this is the beginning. And so this is, Jesus decides, this is the title. This is Jesus 101. This is my first message. It's like the first college class you take, except what Jesus does is he flips it. Like, this is the most complicated thing on the planet. And this is what he starts with. It's like, hey, all of the important things that you need to know in your life about what God's about to do in this new kingdom, I'm about to tell you. And it's the first time I've ever publicly talked to you about it. And I'm starting from the top. I'm not starting with an intro. I'm not starting with something easy to digest. I'm starting with the heaviest, hardest, most complex, and difficult thoughts. And I'm about to put them out there into the stratosphere for you to attempt to digest. He just starts with the heavy stuff. He starts with blessing. Now, unfortunately, because of where we live and we have this word we throw around every time someone sneezes, maybe the word blessing has lost a little value. Maybe it's become a little commonplace. Whereas back when Jesus was doing his thing, maybe it wasn't one of those things that was all that common. And so I want to take just a second before we jump into what Jesus introduces in this Jesus 101, the most complex part of who Jesus is. I want to take a moment and make sure we understand the real definition of blessing. Blessing in the original language is actually a pretty unique and special word. It's something that no one else is except for God. In other words, the word blessing in the Greek, it actually is more of this is the nature of who God is, not something God does to someone. And so the actual blessing piece, and in fact, when we say, hey, God's going to bless us, the literal, if we look at a word picture, it would mean that God's taking a piece of himself and giving it to us. It's not something he's doing to us, it's something he's giving to us. But it's not just something, it's himself. He says, hey, I'm going to take a piece of me and I'm going to give it to you because that's this word blessing, that's all it is. There's this overwhelming, the goodness of who God is, hey, you can take my blessing, you can put it in your pocket and walk around with it. That's how tangible this blessing is. He says, I am the blessing. Of my nature, I am blessing. And so then I have blessing for you. We can have a bit of God rub off on us. Jesus calls his disciples blessed just because he came for them. Jesus calls his disciples blessed because of what's going to happen to them because of him. He says, hey, I'm going to take a little piece of me and give it to you. And that in and of itself will cause you to be blessed. There's a moment in the birth narrative about Jesus where Mary recognizes this. And she says, because of now who I will give birth to, the entire world here on out will call me blessed. At the end of the day, we begin to see that a connection with Jesus is where blessing happens, which also means that when we're disconnected from Jesus, there's an absence of blessing. People who decide to give their entire life to Jesus begin to acquire a piece of the nature of God. There's a promise given. When you give your entire life to me, I will in turn give you the Spirit of God that helps govern and order your steps and thoughts and directives in the way you see the world. And that in and of itself is blessing. In addition to God and his own nature being blessing, making sure we have a really good understanding, the second piece is that God being blessed also means that we are fully satisfied in his blessing. In other words, there's this idea that when we have a disconnected relationship with God, we have things we value. And let's just put them in this hand for a second. The things that we value in our world, maybe it's a boat or house or car or job. For me right now, it's a F-250 King Ranch. I would love to have one of them things. If you got one laying around, just let me know. You know what I'm saying? I don't know if you looked at the used truck market. It's ridiculous right now. It's absurd. So that's not happening anytime soon. However, I hold it here. It's like, man, that brings value. Like, I look at that like, man, I love those trucks. I love to have one. I've had mine for 16 years. I want it gone. I want this one, right? But anyway, whatever it is, whatever it is that we put here that has value, and it's a legitimate value, right? Where we live, the life that we offer for our families. If you want to live in the country and give your family free reign to run around on tractors or to ride four-wheelers, and that's what you value, and you're like, man, I want my kids to be able to fish in a pond. Man, that's something you value. That's great. Or maybe you want to give your kids a different experience. No, I want to be in the city. I want to be able to walk to restaurants and do those. I want them to have that experience. Whatever it is your value, and you put it right there, man, we've got this value. And then Jesus says, here's the deal. You can take all of those things that you value. However, when I give you a piece of God, once you understand what that blessing is, automatically you'll begin to elevate this over what you value here. That there's something just different about this kind of blessing, this piece. And it's not that these decrease in value, it's just that you found a value you didn't know existed previously. It's that all of a sudden these things are like, man, these are the highlights of my life. And suddenly you realize there's a ceiling that's much higher than the ceiling you built for yourself. It just keeps going up. And suddenly Jesus has introduced a completely new value in your life, and it's called blessing. Well, to go with that, once you recognize that value, there are moments in our lives where we will sacrifice these material things for the sake of Jesus. And even in that sacrifice, we will call it blessing. We won't call it sacrifice. We won't say, hey, I'm going without. We will say, no, I've been called to take something out of this hand because of I value this so much. I will take something from here to give to someone else or to make available to something else, to further some other, whatever it might be that God's put in front of us. And I won't see that as sacrifice. I will see that as blessing. And so when we use the phrase, God bless you, or bless you, sometimes it just becomes a little too common. Where Jesus is about to unpack and deliver some of the most complicated theology, period. And it hinges upon us understanding the significance of blessing. I hope I've done a decent job to put us in the right mindset. At the end of the day, we'll find out in just a second. Matthew 5, verse 3, Jesus says this: "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." You hear how complicated that is? Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. That makes no sense. That makes no sense. If I've got anyone in here that's a veteran, right? And I know I see one already. Anybody else a veteran in here, right? Got a couple, right? So we got a few folks that understand what it takes to conquer or to take over another kingdom. Kingdom's old word, right? But we understand. And poor in spirit is not one of those qualifications, right? We talk about army strong, the few, the proud, those kind of things. That is not poor in spirit. We have this idea of this is what it takes to go and conquer, to take what doesn't belong to us, to be saved, to have a Savior, to have a Messiah, all those things. And God has given us the brain and the mentality and some brave men and women who stand on the front line and say, hey, let me show you what this looks like. And it was the same thing in the first century. They were under the oppression of another government. And they were standing there saying, hey, we know what it looks like to push back on them and to say, get out of what belongs to us. And Jesus shows up and says, hey, while you are right in all of those circumstances, the kingdom I'm talking about is not a kingdom that you're aware of. The kingdom I'm talking about is not one that you are equipped to take. You're equipped to take the things that you know, and you are completely right about that. However, this kingdom I'm talking about, this is going to be brand new to you. It's going to be brand new to you. So people are drawn to it, and they're wondering, do we want to be a part of a kingdom that belongs to, how did he phrase it? The poor in spirit? The poor in spirit get the kingdom of God. Another way to say poor in spirit is blessed are the desperate. Blessed are the desperate. For maybe, just maybe, the desperate person will cry out to God for help. And if so, isn't that person truly blessed? In other words, poor in spirit might be able to be rephrased as those who consciously, fully depend on God. That their spirit is poor inwardly. In other words, they've come to the place where they recognize, I have no ability, no capacity to please God. And therefore, if I want to please him, I am desperate. When we look at this word for poor in spirit, specifically poor, there's two versions of it, and specifically this one is going to cover this idea of meaning to crouch or to cower like a beggar would in extreme poverty. And so you can imagine like walking down the street and someone sitting on a city street up against maybe a wall of a building, and maybe they're in rags, and it's the cowering or the crouching and cowering where they can't even make eye contact with you. They just simply look at the ground, and they've got maybe a cup in their hand, and they look at the ground, and they just hold it up, and they're like, please, will you help me, right? And maybe it's a little broken, maybe it's kind of emotional, but they're not making eye contact. It's just please, you right? It's just this, I'm humiliated, and I'm just trying, I'm begging. I don't even want you to see my face because I'm ashamed of what I look like and the situation I'm in, and I'm just, please help me. And that's the picture that this begins to paint. That could we get into a place spiritually where we recognize we can't do anything, just God, please, would you help me? There's two versions of this word. One references specifically a poor person who has the ability to do something about it, but just hasn't just yet. And the other one is a version that's used to mean someone who's actually helpless. Like they do not have the capacity to do anything for themselves. Maybe it's a disability that's stopping them, or circumstances, or maybe someone is oppressing them in a way where they are actually, by definition, 100% helpless. And that is what specifically this word, when Jesus is talking about poor in spirit, is referring to, that you are helpless. There's nothing you can do about it. Jesus goes so far to say just a few chapters later, in Matthew 23, he says, for those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. And this seems to fit into this idea of, if you really want to be about the kingdom, there's this idea of humility. And does that humility look like I'm on the street and I'm just completely desperate and helpless when it comes to my spiritual condition? And because of that, I recognize I can't do anything to please God. And so I simply raise my hand and avert my face and say, please, God, help me. It's a complete opposite turn from what the world talks about. Those who exalt themselves will be humbled. Those who humble themselves will be exalted. One scholar says this, blessed are the rich, for theirs is the kingdom of the world. But Christ says, completely opposite. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven, which is infinitely better than all the kingdoms of earth. And herein we may see that the wisdom of this world becomes foolishness to the wisdom of God. Jesus has shown up and he says, I've got a new kingdom. And he's talking to a people that are oppressed. And in their mind, they know what will be required to gather this new kingdom. But Jesus shows up and says, hey, you do know what's required to get a new kingdom. However, you do not know what's required to get my new kingdom. And what I want to give to you is a blessing, a piece of who my Father is. Not something he's just going to sprinkle on you like fairy dust and say, blessing like a sneeze in a crowded room. But that he would say, hey, I'm going to take a piece of who I am as God, and I'm going to give it to you for you to stick in your pocket and carry it around with you as blessing. He says, are you ready for that? Our world struggles with it. I struggle with this idea. It's one of the more complicated things for us to wrap our minds around. There's this letter written to a church in the very last book of the Bible, and he talks a little bit about this. I'll read it to you in Revelation chapter 3, verse 15 through 17. He says this, I know your deeds, that you are neither hot nor cold. I wish you were either one or the other. So because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I'm about to spit you out of my mouth. You say, I am rich, I have acquired wealth, I do not need a thing. But you do not realize that you are wretched, pitiful, poor, blind, and naked. And I'm reading that thinking, how could someone so rich be naked? I mean, if they've got a lot of property, they might just walk around naked, you know? I mean, if I had that much property, I might walk around. I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm not saying I would. I probably would. You know what I'm saying? But I'm just saying, I guess, but that's not what he's talking about, right? That's not what he's not talking about, hey, your preference of what you wear. He's saying, hey, no, you think you have this idea. And you think that your life is all together. However, when I look at the things that will last beyond just this temporary moment, you actually aren't clothed at all. Like you've got this idea of what it means to be built up and to be secure. And I would look at it and yeah, you're good for the next decade or 2 decades. Or maybe you've even provided an inheritance for your children and their children. However, you are still destitute and poor when it comes to the things that actually matter in this world. And he's trying to introduce a completely new approach to kingdom. And it's wrapped completely around blessing. It's wrapped completely around blessing. And he's given his very best opportunity, very best shot at convincing them about this blessing. And he's trying to say, hey, here's the deal. If you can't get yourself in a spiritual place where you're like, you know what, I can't even look because I can't even look. I'm just gonna hide my head and look at the ground and just say, God, please, because blessed are the desperate, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. It's so different. It's so different than what we were accustomed to. And this is the very first thing Jesus says. When he's thinking through his thoughts, this is the very first thing Jesus says. Well, sometimes when we do Bible study, we've got to be really careful that if we take just a word or two, if we just take a verse or two, we might find ourselves painting a picture that's not all that accurate. You see, Jesus actually begins this talk, this Jesus 101, with an incredibly complicated phrase. And if we take just that complicated phrase and we parse it with a couple other sentences, we come away with, this is the way we approach God. Please, let me cower, let me sit up against the wall and scoot back in my rags and just, God, please, please. And I don't know about you, but that doesn't seem like good news at all. And Jesus showed up promising good news. That sounds awful to me. So I think it's important that if we're going to take the time to study a word or two, that we might ought to take the time to study a complete picture of how Jesus presents this idea of poor in spirit, lowly in spirit. In fact, if we go just a bit further, there is a moment where Jesus is having a conversation with some of his closest friends, and he gives us a little more insight, paints a little clearer picture of what does it mean to be lowly spirit, to be desperate. Listen to this. Matthew 18, 1 through 5. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" He called a little child to him, and he placed the child among them, and he said, "Truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever takes the lowly position of this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes him." Did you catch that lowly position as a child? Now I have to ask the question though, how is a child in a lowly position? How is a child in a desperate position? How is a child in a I can't help myself position? Well, you see it. It happens around 4:30 or 5 o'clock every day. They look up at their mom or dad or grandmother or aunt, uncle, whoever's watching them, caring for them, their guardian, and they say, "What's for dinner?" Their entire day has been spent doing other things. I mean, they've been playing, or they went to school, and they got home, and when they got home, they punched their sister or their brother, and they buried their toys in the backyard, and I don't know where it went, that kind of thing. And they played Nerf Wars, and they did Barbie stuff, and then they, I don't know, almost broke their arm on the slide because they didn't want to go down anymore. They jumped all those things. And then all of a sudden, they're done with that, and it's like, "Hey, I feel something in my stomach. Mom, what's for dinner?" Right? They've given no thought to it. Why? Because they can't do anything about it. A 4-year-old can't. What's the 4-year-old going to do? No, the 4-year-old comes up to their mom and dad and says, "Hey, I can't help myself here. What's for dinner?" Because I'm asking you because I know you're going to take care of that. And I know I can't do it myself. How is a child desperate? It's because they ask you to watch everything they do. They say, "Hey, Mom, are you watching? Watch me do this." Were you watching? Were you watching? You know what I'm talking about? Look what I can do. You know what I'm talking about? Some of you are having flashbacks. Stewie. All right? And it's like, "Hey, were you watching? Did you watch? Are you watching? Are you watching?" Hadley had a dance camp she was a part of this past week. I've seen this dance. It's 36 seconds long, like a million times. It's like, "You want to watch the dance?" Yeah, I do. I can even do the dance now. Like even the little, well, not that part, but where they put the leg up by your head. That's not, other than that though, the rest of it, you know, I can do it. I love when one of my kids says, "Hey, watch this." It's like we're saying, hey, God, I'm about to do something. I could do it, but it'd be really cool if you'd watch. It'd be really cool if you were a part of this with me. I mean, I can do it without you, but I actually don't want to. It actually means a lot more if you're watching. When they ask you to take them places, "Mom, can we go here? Dad, can we go here? Can we go here? Can we go here?" The reason they ask you is because they can't take themselves. They can't get there without you. And I know sometimes it probably feels like you're more of an Uber driver than a mom or a dad, caregiver, grandparent. But it's in those moments that hopefully we are realizing what it means to be lowly in spirit, to not be able to help ourselves. How do we know what it means to take the lowly position of a child? It's because they're scared of the dark until they run into our rooms. it's just as dark in our room. Actually, it's darker. There's no night lights happening. There's no little light coming in from outside. It is dark. But we're there. And that makes it better. It's like, God, I'm actually a little unsure about this darkness I'm living in. But you tell me your Son is the light of the world. And with him, I'll walk through anything. So no. The blessing is not in cowering from God, averting your eyes, and putting your hand up and saying, God, just whatever. But it's looking at him and saying, so what's for dinner? I'm scared of the dark. Can I come hang out with you for a while? I'm about to go do this thing. Will you watch me? Will you watch over me? And when you can get to there, when you can get to that place in your spiritual life, yours is the kingdom of heaven. Man, what a good day. Bella, what a good day. No matter what we teach on each week,